The story begins with the protagonist, Shen Xiang, practicing martial arts by punching the wooden log, feeling satisfied with himself and enjoying his own company. A sound of an applaud came from behind. It was Shen Jinhua, along with his two followers, who mockingly berated the protagonist Shen Xiang. The protagonist Shen Xiang, feeling irritated, asked what Shen Jinhua wanted. Shen Jinhua, without answering to the protagonist, scoffed and began telling the protagonist Shen Xiang not to embarrass the Shen family with his pseudo-practice in its martial arts training ground. Then proceeds to mock again by asking the protagonist, Shen Xiang, whether he wanted to punch the broken logs to make others laugh, at the same time breaking the logs himself with his qi, impressing his two followers. One commended that brother Shen Jinhua was too strong, and the other praised his qi as the true form of 4th level of mortal martial realm. Shen Jin further proceeds to mock the protagonist, Shen Xiang, by pointing out that even if the protagonist, Shen Xiang, does his best to practice every day or practices until his hands bleeds, it will be a waste, as the protagonist Shen Xiang didn't possess the spiritual veins. Shen Jinhua further mocked his father as trash, and implying the protagonist to be a trash like his father. The protagonist, reaching his breaking point, frustratingly dared Shen Jinhua to repeat his words. Shen Jinhua further, with mocking attitude, questioned the protagonist, Shen Xiang, whether he was wrong in saying so, and also indicating that the strength of the protagonist's father, Shen Tainhu, that he might possess the strength to compete for the position of patriarch, but because of the protagonist's weakness he does not qualify to participate. Further adding that the protagonist live to feed on his old father, despite his old age, making others feel pity for the protagonist's father. The protagonist Shen Xiang, having heard enough, dashed forward to confront Shen Jinhua. While inquiring if Shen Jinhua wanted to pick a fight with him, Shen Jinhua looked down on the protagonist with disdain. While the protagonist directing his punch towards Shen Jinhua, possessing superior martial prowess compared to the protagonist, moved fast. The protagonist only managed to leave only a scratch on his right cheek, infuriating Shen Jinhua. Shen Jinhua angrily exclaimed that he would kill the protagonist, and took a fighting stance. The protagonist, while thinking to himself that the opposition Shen Jinhua, being just at the 4th mortal martial realm, only relied on his true qi and is lazy to practice, and hoped for luck, and thought that the chances for winning may be possible, in case qi was not used and only relying on physical prowess for combat. Both of them launched at each other. The protagonist managed to avoid Shen Jinhua's punch, and instead managed to deliver his own punch on Shen Jinhua's stomach. One of the followers, shocked that the protagonist, who was considered a trash, seemed to manage to defeat Shen Jinhua. The other follower of Shen Jinhua pointed to the other to look closely. Returning to the combat, the protagonist suddenly felt the pain of the impact on his fist. Seemingly Shen Jinhua used qi energy to harden his body, including his stomach. At the last moment, the protagonist's fist impacted. Shen Jinhua then jumped in the air, and with a kick sent the protagonist to the ground with a loud crashing sound. The impact shattered the ground, and dust rose like smoke. Shen Jinhua, then thinking to himself and feeling displeased that he was almost defeated by the trash. The onlooker, follower of Shen Jinhua, with admiration asked whether Shen Jinhua had reached the 5th level of mortal martial realm. Shen Jinhua, feeling proud, acknowledged that he had just advanced, but it seemingly was working quite well. Shen Jinhua, while lifting up the protagonist's body, grabbing his hair, who was almost lifeless and bloodied, asked, with disdain, if the protagonist wanted to use his wits to sneak in and attack on him, and what should he do with the protagonist. While proceeding to use his qi to strike the protagonist's chest, sending him flying and crashing against the wall of the house. Shen Jinhua then followed up to attack by directing his qi attack energy towards the protagonist, with the intention to kill the protagonist. There was a loud boom sound with smokes blowing up on the impact of his attack. After the smoke from the attack cleared out, a figure stood before the protagonist, and he seemed to have taken the qi energy attack which was directed towards the protagonist. It was the protagonist's father, Shen Tianhu. Shen Jinhua, with amusement, clapped excitedly behind him. like a spoiled child, and said that the protagonist's father had good cultivation and was thus able to directly block his attack. The protagonist's father, Shen Xiang, sustained the injury. Having seen his son injured and unconscious, Shen Xiang's side glared at Shen Zhenhua and asked Shen Zhenhua to get lost. Shen Zhenhua felt a chill and turned pale blue. Shen Zhenhua hurriedly retreated with his 2 followers, but not before saying that it will not be long, before the time to compete for the position of the head of the family, and that he shall look forward to see his own father succeed. The protagonist's father Shen Xiang sadly held his bloodied and defeated son in his arms. The protagonist, Shen Xiang, weakly muttered with blood dripping from his nose and head that he was a burden to his father. The protagonist's father, Shen Xiang, while picking him up, said that the world of martial arts was not for everyone, keeping in his mind his son's weakness because of the absence of spiritual veins. The protagonist's father further advised him that normal people have their own way of life and that he did not need to be bothered by his struggle. The protagonist uttered with weak voice that the Shen family does not to accept mortals, referring to himself, in their fold. Shen Xiang was recovering from the injuries inside his locked room. A female voice was heard calling out to him, asking whether he was inside. Outside Xiang, a beautiful woman adored with flowers on both her hair buns, translucent eyes and skin fair as mirror. The protagonist, Shen Xiang, wondered if she was Xiang Xiang. Xiang Xiang was his fiancée. Xiang Xiang asked Mr. Shantain, the protagonist's father, who was also outside the protagonist's room, whether Shen Xiang was seriously injured, as he refused to see her despite her multiple attempts to approach him. The protagonist's father advised her to go home, as Shen Xiang might not want to see her too. Xiang Xiang, still persistent, asked what might be the reason, because she was his fiancée and so they could share all their grievances to one another regardless. The protagonist's father recommended Xiang Xiang to end the relationship with Shen Xiang. Xiang Xiang, taken aback, asked for the meaning. The protagonist's father, continuing without concerning to answer her, pointed out that Xiang Xiang herself was the treasure of Shui family, and also a martial art genius, was not compatible with his son, who do not possess spiritual veins and thus destined to live a mortal life, further adding that Shen Xiang did not deserve her. Xiang Xiang, taken aback, stated that they loved each other and there was no question of worthiness, but the protagonist's father asserted that the decisions for marriage was for the parents of both the concerned parties to decide, and then pleaded her to go back to her home. Shen Xiang, who was inside his closed room listening to their conversation, vowed to become stronger, defying everything, despite his lack of spiritual veins. He resolved to become stronger for his fiancée Xiang Xiang, his father Shen Xiang, and himself.